Hello and welcome to another episode of Josh Talks Vikes. This is one I am pumped for. We're going to be talking about something I'm really passionate about, which is Viking running backs. And just running backs in general, but especially the Vikings ones, how to rep one of my favorite Vikings running backs, which would be Dalvin Cook, one of the players that made me fall in love with the Vikings. He got drafted 2017 and he was just phenomenal. The second I saw him, I was like, that's my guy. Kind of have a little enshrinement for him right here. I got his Funko Pop and a bunch of his cards. And one of my favorite Vikings players. I'm talking about some guys who could be the next great Vikings running back, be his replacement this year that I think they have in the running back room. We almost got a complete carbon copy of him. And then we got another undrafted free agent I'm really excited to talk about. Hopefully he makes the roster. And I'm just going to talk about Jordan Mason just a little bit, give some notes on him since he is, I feel like he's the lead back in the Vikings running back room, especially last year when Aaron Jones got injured. And if things were to be my way, I wouldn't have Aaron Jones play a whole lot. He'd hold more of a mentor role as he's aging. But I'm excited to get into it on this episode of Josh Talks Vikes. Thank you for joining me again. So let's get into it. I spent a lot of time today taking notes, watching some film, albeit it's not like crazy film, whatever I can access on my school computer. I don't have a lot of resources as far as film goes, but I made sure to watch game replays, highlights, and be as thorough as possible with these new Viking running backs. And I want to start with Demond Claiborne, running back out of Wake Forest. They did draft him, 6th round pick, 5'10". It lists him as 5'9 3/4, 188 pounds on their website, but you see some places that list him as 5'10", 190, even pushing 200 pounds. So he's a pretty decent guy, and he's the pretty decent sized guy, and he's kind of a carbon copy of Dalvin Cook. I feel like Dalvin Cook, ACC running back. So is this guy. Both of them had good speed. Dalvin did run a 4.49 at the combine, so not the fastest, but combine 40 times don't tell the whole story. Most of the time, the players are faster in games, but Demond is extremely fast, real barn burner, home run hitter, 4.37 40, and they're just running backs that are excel with open space and speed and making people miss, both of them. And I think the Vikings could have a real one. And Demond Claiborne, I'm excited to see him work. I do have some notes on him here. It seems like he does thrive with speed and space, as I was talking about, watching his highlights in his film. I wish I could show some here, but I need to work a little bit on my editing skills, and maybe we'll get that in future episodes. But he thrives with his speed, and he creates space extremely well. And it seems like he evades tackles a little bit non-traditionally, I feel like. It seems like he makes most guys miss with a jump cut or a stick. And while you might be like, okay, that just seems like a regular elusive back, he's just juking people out, but it really doesn't seem like jukes. It's just like a series of quick movements, like a quick change of direction, not like a head fake and everything to go with it. It's just like boom, plant, and he's gone. And I think that's really good. He's real good out of his breaks, real good speed, accelerates extremely fast, and really gets good separation between him and, real fast players like cornerbacks and safeties, which I think is something the Vikings really need. We haven't had someone with great breakaway speed in a while. And he finishes his runs really well. His speed helps him with that. It seems like he gets ahead of these defenders, and they have no choice but to tackle him from behind, which helps because then he's falling forward on all of his runs for at least 2, maybe 3 more yards, which is really effective. He was really efficient this year. He was averaging 5.1 yards per carry and 5.1 yards per touch, which was including his receiving yards. 907 rushing yards on the ground, 100 through the air. I believe maybe it was 140 through the air. So not too much through the air, but he is a decent pass catcher. Seems like they target him in the flat, screen passes, nothing too crazy. They're not having him, get flexed out as a wide receiver, run these crazy wheel routes, or be matched up with a safety or like a nickel one-on-one. But he can make linebackers miss. He's a threat for linebackers to coverage. So I think that's a real plus with them because the Viking running backs now are pretty one-dimensional, except for Aaron Jones, but he's also aging and doesn't play a whole lot due to injuries. So it'd be nice to have a guy, can work in all facets of the game. He has decent contact balance, although he is easier to take down just as by one tackler because of his how small he is. He's not extremely small. I mean, it's the modern era, so a running back can be less or just barely 200 pounds, and that's not considered bad. But his size does make it easier for one person to tackle him. But he does have good contact balance. But it does seem like the turf monster catches him a lot in the open field. Seems like he trips on air a little bit. Maybe he gets a little too excited. Maybe it has something to do with his speed. But that's not too big of a problem. I'd rather have someone run 70 yards down the field, maybe slip and fall, than, someone who just gets it 10 yards down the field but breaks a bunch of tackles. We'll take what we can get. Even if it isn't completely finished touchdown run, it's a very good run. And he brings that speed, that aspect that the Vikings can use. And he does make it hard for tacklers to get to him with these, the series of jump cuts I was talking about, the sticks, just the playing in the ground and just going, not a complete and total juke evading a guy one-on-one, but just a quick change of direction that fakes out people. But like I did say, his size does make it easier to be tackled one-on-one. But we do have backs on the Vikings, Jordan Mason, guys who are there to get those short yardage plays and to drag a few guys. This isn't what they drafted Damon for, was to be a big bruising back. They drafted him, I feel like, to be more of a scat back and to get the job done with the speed in the open space that the Vikings haven't had, since Dalvin Cook a few years ago, or even like Adrian Peterson. So that'll be fun to see. And here's my guy, Keyshawn Owens, out of FIU, undrafted free agent. But I like him. I've been seeing some of his film, and he's extremely efficient, like stupid efficient. He got 6.1 yards per carry. And now that was on a lot of carries. He was a very big weapon for FIU's offense. He was really tearing it up. I believe he had 200 carries 200 plus carries as opposed to Damon's just like 170, 179. So he was toting the rock and he was going places with it, which is something I really like to see. He's 5'10", 210, so his size does make it hard for a single tackler to take him down, which is something that I do like. He's a little bit more of a bruiser, but he does go with the flow, thrives in zone, and he's patient, which is something you don't really see out of a power back. And I do like to see it out of him. I wouldn't necessarily say he's a power back, but he does have a few more of those tendencies than I would say Damon does, or, Xavier Scott does, like an RB3. He's the RB3 for the Vikings, Xavier Scott. So he does have a little more downhill, head-first tendencies, and I do like to see that out of a guy. I want to see someone who goes and puts their head down, fights for those extra yards. And like I said, with Damon, Keyshawn, amazing finish to all his runs. There's a lot of runs where he's getting stopped by guys like 5 yards short of the end zone, but he's not getting stopped. He's keeping the legs churning. He's falling forward. He's not turning his back into contact, and he's making it so that he keeps it going. The whistle's not blowing, and more of his teammates can come push him, and he gets some hard yards. And it's really good to see. I think that's something that's a real big motivator, is when a running back is just churning his legs. Like Adrian Peterson, I know there's that game, was a while back, might have been his 2012 season, where he got stopped about, maybe it was like the 10-yard line by, oh my gosh, the Cowboys safety, Heath. He wore the number 38, but he stands up AP one-on-one. AP's in the air, but he starts churning his legs, keeps going, line pushes him in, touchdown. That's just exhilarating. And I think a guy like Keyshawn who can bring that back, and kind of serve the Jordan Mason power role. But I mean, he's a younger guy, which is nice. We need the fresh blood. And I want to see that, those tough guys who are really fighting for those extra yards, that got that grit, because that's something we need on the Vikings. We're a big passing offense, and I want to see us go back to the run like the Vikings used to thrive in. He has an innate break tackle ability, which I find is something real attractive about him. There's a lot of guys who seem like they're really good at breaking tackles, but they break tackles in a different way. Like, this may be blasphemous to say. I feel like it's something that's hard to let it come out of my mouth, but it's Jeremiah Love. He's a great running back, but I wouldn't say he's as good as breaking tackles as some other guys, because he went untouched. And that's his X factors. He's so fast, blazing speed. He creates that space. He's very evasive, so he doesn't have to deal with breaking tackles like some of those other guys. Although he does, Jeremiah Love is very good at breaking tackles. Like that one game against Penn State, like 2 years ago, not this past college football playoffs, but the one before that, the first 12-team playoffs. Phenomenal run against Penn State. Really fights for it. But Jeremiah, he doesn't really get touched. That's a tribute to his offensive line. So I feel like his break tackle ability isn't as good as some other running backs like Emmett Johnson. I mean, I love Emmett Johnson. I feel like I glaze him a little too much sometimes. But the Nebraska offensive line wasn't too great. So he was getting hit a lot. But he was fighting for it. He was getting more yards. Like Cam Scatterbo, he's elite. He's getting hit, but he's not being elusive and breaking tackles by like, oh, you can only get one hand on me, so you can't bring me down. Like these guys are hitting him head on, and he's just meeting them in the holes. He's just putting his shoulder down, putting his helmet down, breaking these tackles the hard way. And I feel like that's what Keyshawn has. He gets head up by these guys to the side, and they just bounce off. He just bounces off. Something like that. He has good contact balance. He stumbles, but he recovers and he keeps going for extra yards. And that's something that's extremely valuable, especially in the league, because people are going to be hitting you a lot. Maybe a lot of these guys, and they're great tacklers. That's how they make it to the league. And just that extra few percent chances that you can have to make them miss, not directly because of your elusivity, but because of your power, because of your grit. That's something that I find extremely valuable. And the only things I can rip on him for is he does seem like he has average acceleration. I don't really know about his 40 time, but he does have a good top speed. And now, when I say average acceleration, I don't want to dog on him. He's certainly fast, and some people, I'm not exactly sure what he ran, but let's just throw it out there. Let's say it's like pushing a 4.5. And people are like, oh man, it's the first thought that comes into my mind too, is like, when a running back runs a 4.5, you think, man, he's like dirt slow. But that's like really fast. That still gets the job done. No average person, not a lot of athletes are going to touch a 4.5. The average person's lucky if they grace a 5-second 40. So 4.5 is nothing to sneeze at. And especially if you have the full package to go with it, it can make up a little bit for 40 time. Like a wide receiver doesn't have to be a barn burner, possess that blazing speed to be good, as long as he has, good hands and good route running. I feel like that's kind of what Keyshawn possesses. Like, great ability to break tackles, good finish on his runs, gritty player. And, he makes up for some of that, lower end acceleration as far as a running back goes with the rest of his package. Another rip I do have for him is he does seem to have some fumble troubles. He does recover them, though. When I was watching, but they are highlights. They are, his best plays when I say film. So they're not going to show him fumbling the ball because that's a low light. No one wants to see that. But he does seem to have some fumble troubles. It's not for like running like a bread loaf, with the ball like a bread loaf. But he does seem to have a little bit of fumble trouble, but that's nothing that can't be fixed. Adrian Peterson, he fumbled the ball a little bit. Jordan Mason fumbled last year, but we still love him. We still love him to death. So that's something that can be fixed, just high and tight. And that's something I can deal with the rest of the package he brings, because it's a very fixable issue. Past that, for Jordan Mason, where's number 27, traded for him last year from the 49ers. He picked up, right where McCaffrey left off when he was injured, and had a great few seasons. Was really killing it for me in fantasy before a little bit of injuries limited him. But this year he seemed pretty decent. Did not break 800 yards rushing though. Disappointing. I feel like it's because he's a little more one-dimensional. So he's kind of, downhill. He's a downhill power back, but he is surprisingly good at running off tackle. I didn't really think about that, but he hits these little patient, little stutter steps. He's very good at following his blockers, and he's good at getting off tackle, while Jordan Mason does not possess that crazy breakaway speed that Damon does. He still gets the job done, albeit he will get hawked down, I'd say, after 15 to 20 yards. But that's something you can deal with because, it's 15 to 20 yards, and he's kind of a power back. So, he's kind of the guy, you need 3 yards, he'll get you 3 yards. You need 5 yards, 10 yards, he's going to get you 3 yards, So anything extra you can get out of a power back, especially like him, I feel like that's good, and it's something we can deal with something we can work with. He makes it very hard for just one guy to tackle him. I've seen Jordan Mason, his film. I even saw him play, live when I went to England with my father to watch the Vikings play this past year. He's a real beast, real bruiser. This guy's a tank. I'm not exactly sure what his height and weight is, but he sure makes it seem like he is a bus, a freight train. Makes it very hard for the first guy to tackle him. The first guy usually bounces off, but it slows him down a little bit, and another guy gets to him. But he's dragging these guys. He's fighting for extra yards, and that's something I really like. It's a trait that I said Keyshawn possessed, and I like these guys. I like having them on the roster. I think it's something that the rest of the team can get behind, and I like it. I really like it out of Jordan Mason. I feel like it makes up for some of his other flaws. He finishes his runs very well. Like I said, he makes the first tackler bounce off him most times, but he does finish high. I mean, it seems like some all running backs kind of do, as they get past the first 5, maybe 10 yards, but as a little bit of the run, they start seeing green grass. They start, raising up a little bit. And I feel like Jordan Mason does that a little earlier than some other guys. As a power back, I'd expect him to be leaning forward, fighting for yards, lower in the shoulder. But he does kind of turn up a little bit. And I feel like that limits a bit of his potential, which leads into my next kind of rip on him. It's not crazy. He doesn't do it too often, but he does turn his back into the contact. Well, sometimes that can be good because then you're pushing, with your legs. You get those powerful quads in there. But leaning back into the contact, I feel like it kind of limits you from getting extra yards because you can't reach out as securely with the ball, over your head like that Antonio Brown play from a long time ago. But I feel like leaning back into contact is kind of like my only rip on him, but it doesn't happen that often. And he makes up for it with a lot of his other traits. They're very good. Other than that, like I said, he's a yards after contact machine. Due to his slower speed, he's usually getting hit closer to the line of scrimmage, but he's breaking those tackles. He's fighting for those yards. And I think Mason's pretty well-rounded as far as like his downhill, a little bit of off-tackle zone runs go. I feel like he could work on a little bit more of his receiving game, but it's nothing crazy. I feel like the Vikings don't plan on using him that way, have never planned on using him as a third down kind of receiving back. So it's something he doesn't have to throw a lot of effort into because, that's just not the game plan, the scheme for him. So I'd say just he work on his little fumble trouble issues. He fumbled a few times last year. Work on that. Carry a football around with him wherever he goes. And, work on those few things where it's like turning his back into contact, however rare that happens. And I think he's a great guy. I think he's a real good running back. He seems like an NFC North kind of running back, downhill. He's just hard. He's just a hard, tough guy. And I think that's something the Vikings can use. And I hope he steps up from next season. And the last guy, albeit he's not a running back really, he's a new fullback, Max Bradison. He did play quarterback in high school, and then he walked on at Michigan as a tight end. So he was running the number 82 for his first few seasons, lining up on the end of the line of scrimmage, blocking more stretch plays, which I think his tight end background is very good for him because instead of just being a downhill lead blocking fullback, he's good at, lining up on the edge of the line of scrimmage, blocking some ends or, kind of stretch blocking, guiding the running back down the sideline. So I think that's something that's valuable for him. But he made the position switch full-time to fullback, albeit he did not run as a fullback. He was more of a check-down kind of fullback, throwing it out to him in the flat. And so he made the position change a few years into Michigan, and he's been thriving ever since. This guy is an absolute unit. He's 6'2", 250 pounds. I'm like 5'10", 190. So this guy's 4 inches taller than me, and he weighs 60 pounds more than me. This guy's a freak and tank. He's going to be able to take on any linebacker, and that's something I've seen him do. He takes on anyone, defensive linemen, defensive tackles, not just defensive ends, and he's just lighting them up. These linebackers, he's just taking them on one-on-one. They're downhill in that hole. It does not matter. He's meeting them right where they're at. He's creating space, which I feel like is something that's essential, that he creates space for the smaller running backs like Damon Claiborne that the Vikings drafted. And he's just gritty. This guy finishes everything well. His catches, he's always fighting for extra yards. His blocks, he's just annihilating everybody. He's finishing on top every single block. He's bowling the guy over. He's landing on top of him. He's not getting pushed back. He's always falling forward. He's just decimating these safeties, these corners. He's creating space. Like Rich Eisen, I believe it was Rich Eisen said, you follow this guy, he scored touchdowns, and I had full confidence in Max Bradison. has done wonderful things at Michigan, leading guys like Blake Corum to the end zone. Doak, Walker, award winner. Other guys like Justice Haynes this year, Khalil Moolings the year before. All these good running backs in Michigan, they're good because he creates the space to make them look good. And he's extremely aggressive. He's a real selfless guy. Hasn't scored in over 900 snaps. So, that's a guy you want on your team. He's putting his life on the line, for this running back to go score, for this wide receiver in the flat, on a bubble screen to go score. He's out blocking for him. He's just going after one guy, pancakes him, going on to the next guy until, he's just paving the way, leading him to the promised land, the end zone. And I think that's something that the Vikings really need to see, since C.J. Ham retired. But what I would like to see him do, I remember when I was a little bit younger, earlier seasons, 2017, 2018, Kirk's first years with the Vikings, C.J. Ham was toting the rock a little bit. And that's something I like to see. The Vikings are looking to improve the running game in the red zone and everything. You need to make everyone in that backfield a threat. Kyler's already running. You got these series of running backs, RB1, maybe Jordan Mason, RB2, 3, Aaron Jones, Damon Claiborne. Hopefully Keyshawn gets some time. I see the potential in him. So all those guys are threats. You need to make sure that the guy blocking for him too, he's a threat. They're not like, oh man, they're just going to run with Jordan Mason behind or Damon Claiborne behind Max Bradison, or whenever they bring him out, they're like, oh, he's just blocking. No, I want to see Max get some ball carrying opportunities. He's playing tight end. He's a competent pass catcher. I haven't seen him get up a lot, catch balls on guys, make crazy contested catches, but he seems like he can get the job done. That's what he was first on scholarship at Michigan for. So I want to see him target him in the flat a little bit, target him downfield. I want him to be a gadget piece like Kyle Juszczyk is used on the 49ers. And what I'd really like to see is I want to see Max carry the rock a few times this year. I mean, this guy seems like he craves contact, and especially in the red zone, that's important. I want to see Kyler Murray turn around, put this ball in this guy's belly, and just see him run over a guy into the end zone. Just rumble like a Mike Allstott thing, because I know that he's got that extreme aggression, that drive, that grit that's going to get him down the field. And if KOC is willing to give him the opportunity to run the ball on those plays whenever he's play calling, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see some of those plays installed. But that's about it. That's all I have. I'm super stoked for this running back room the Vikings have this upcoming season. I can't wait to see it. I'll be looking out over rookie minicamp, the training camps over the season, seeing how this position battles in the running back room are going down, especially in preseason when some UDFAs like Keyshawn, who might not be the starting back, could get some time. Damon, when he gets his first looks. And I'm really excited to see them in these games this season, especially divisional games when it gets tough and the Vikings are running the ball. I want to see Max Bradison guiding these guys, into the promised land, this end zone, to go beat some divisional rivals, some other tough running teams like the Packers, the Lions really turn to the ground with the ball. And I want to see us, meet them there, because we've always been, or these past few years, we've been big passing teams, and I want to see us match their approach. And, it used to be a shootout, but I think now we can punch now with our running back room, and that's something I'd like to see. And thank you for joining me on another episode of Josh Talks Vikes. I'm still working on this posting schedule. I'll try to get at least one out every week, maybe one or two. And thank you for watching. If you have any other position groups you'd like me to look into, any stats, storylines, email me at joshtalksvikes.com. I'll be checking my emails. I'll make sure to write those down, spend some time looking at some film, taking some notes, and I'll get those in a video for you for sure. If you really like this video, leave a comment on a suggestion on something you enjoyed that I can work on. Leave a like, even subscribe. Anything is awesome, I really appreciate you guys for supporting me. I know I've been getting some new subscribers, and it really brings me this joy, this happiness to my heart that I can have this passion that I can share with others, even if they're not Vikings fans, even if I'm reaching Eagles fans with Logan Ralston coming on the show, Broncos fans with Peyton, Chiefs fans, Chiefs Kingdom with Aiden. I'm just here to reach all audiences, make sure that people, teenagers like me, know that they can voice their opinions, talk about their team, just share these things, no matter how many or how little people are watching, that this is a dream for me, and it's coming true with your help, and I really thank you for that. And I want to shout out Quinn Hoover. who was on the show, Packers expert. Reaching out to Packers fans too for sending me this hat. Really enjoy it. It's really comfortable. And thank you so much, everyone, for watching, for joining me, just for lending me an ear, for me to just talk, spew all my knowledge, all my joy about the Vikings. And I thank you, and I hope you'll join me again on the next episode of Josh Talks Vikes. Thank you so much.